Before Israel embraced the idea of one God, its ancestors worshipped a pantheon of powerful deities. El, the father of gods, stood as the ancient high god. Baal, the stormbringer, ruled the skies with thunder. Yahweh, once a regional warrior deity, would later rise to supremacy. And Asherah, the mother goddess, was honored as the divine consort and life-giver. These original gods shaped the spiritual imagination of the ancient Israelites long before monotheism took root. In this extended exploration, we uncover their myths, roles, and the dramatic transformations that reshaped the faith that would change the world. When most people think of the faith of ancient Israel, they imagine monotheism, one God, Yahweh, ruling over all creation. The Hebrew Bible itself insists repeatedly that Yahweh is the only true God, and all others are false idols. Yet history and archaeology tell a far more complex story. Beneath the theological veneer of later centuries lies an older reality. Israel's ancestors once lived in a world of many gods. These included El, the father of the divine council Baal, the stormbringer and warrior, Asherah, the mother goddess and fertility figure, and Yahweh, who began as a regional deity before rising to supremacy. Far from being a simple line from polytheism to monotheism, Israel's religious history is a tapestry woven from myth, politics, and cultural evolution. To understand this story, we must travel back to the Bronze and Iron Ages, when Canaanite culture dominated the land, and the Israelites were only beginning to emerge as a distinct people. El, the ancient high god. El was the head of the Canaanite pantheon, worshipped for centuries before Israel became a nation. His very name, El, simply meant God in the Semitic languages of the region, and his image appears throughout Ugaritic texts, inscriptions, and ancient prayers. El was often portrayed as a wise, bearded elder sitting enthroned in majesty. He was considered the creator of heaven and earth, the father of gods and humans alike. He presided over the divine council, a heavenly assembly where other gods, his sons and daughters, took their place. This image resonates in the Bible itself. In passages like Psalm 82, we read of God presiding in the assembly of El, surrounded by gods who stand as judges. Even in the Hebrew Scriptures, faint echoes of this older divine council remain, though later editors often reshape the language to emphasize Yahweh's supremacy. Importantly, the name Israel itself bears El's imprint, El rules, or one who strives with El. This strongly suggests that El, not Yahweh, was once the chief god of the earliest Israelites. Baal, the stormbringer and rival. If El was the ancient patriarch, then Baal was the dynamic and youthful force of nature. Known as the storm god, Baal controlled thunder, lightning, rain, and fertility, the very lifeblood of an agrarian society dependent on seasonal rains for survival. Baal's myths, preserved in the Ugaritic text from Ras Shamra, modern Syria, describe him as a warrior who battles the sea god Yam and later confronts Mot, the god of death and drought. His victories secured the cycles of fertility and harvest, ensuring life for the people. In Canaanite religion, Baal's cult was vibrant, filled with rituals of sacrifice, feasting, and temple worship. Archaeological finds in Israel, such as altars and inscriptions, show that Baal worship was widespread among the Israelites themselves. The Hebrew Bible reflects this reality with both hostility and familiarity. Prophets like Elijah waged dramatic contests against Baal worship, such as the famous story on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18. Yet the vehemence of these denunciations reveals how entrenched Baal was in Israelite society. Baal was not some distant foreign idol. He was a local rival to Yahweh, competing for devotion on Israel's very soil. Asherah, the forgotten mother. Among the most intriguing and controversial figures in Israel's religious past is Asherah, the great mother goddess. In Canaanite tradition, she was the consort of El and the mother of 70 divine sons. She represented fertility, nourishment, and the sacred tree of life. Archaeological discoveries in Israel have confirmed her importance. Inscriptions found at Kuntalat Adrud and Khirbet el-Kam mention Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting that for many Israelites, Asherah was worshipped alongside Yahweh as his divine partner. Figurines of a female figure with exaggerated breasts, interpreted as Asherah icons, have been unearthed in large numbers, often in domestic shrines. The biblical writers, however, condemned her repeatedly. References to Asherah poles, wooden symbols erected on high places or near altars, appear throughout the books of Kings and Chronicles, usually in contexts where reforming kings destroy them. This indicates that Asherah worship was deeply woven into Israelite religious life, despite official efforts to erase her. Asherah's near erasure from Israel's official memory may reflect a later patriarchal and monotheistic agenda, which sought to eliminate feminine divine imagery from the religion. Yet her traces remain, whispering of a time when the Israelites honored a divine mother as well as a father. Yahweh, from regional deity to supreme God. Unlike El, Baal, or Asherah, Yahweh's origins are more obscure. He does not appear prominently in early Canaanite pantheons. Instead, some scholars suggest Yahweh may have originated among nomadic groups in the southern deserts, Midian, Edom, or Seir, before being adopted into Israel's pantheon. Biblical texts themselves hint at this origin. Passages such as Deuteronomy 33 verse 2 and Judges 5 verse 4 describe Yahweh coming from Seir or Edom, southern regions outside Canaan. This suggests Yahweh began as a regional warrior god, associated with storm and battle. As Israel emerged as a distinct people, Yahweh gradually rose in prominence. At first, he was likely one god among many, perhaps even considered a son of El. Over time, however, Yahweh absorbed El's titles and roles, being redefined as the creator, the lawgiver, and the supreme deity. This process was not smooth. It required centuries of conflict, reform, and reimagination. Prophets like Hosea, Isaiah, and Jeremiah attacked the worship of Baal and Asherah, urging exclusive loyalty to Yahweh. Kings such as Hezekiah and Josiah enforced reforms that centralized worship in Jerusalem and abolished rival cults. By the time of the Babylonian exile, Yahweh had not only absorbed El's role, but had also been proclaimed the only true God, a transformation from henotheism, worship of one God among many, to radical monotheism. The divine council and biblical echoes. Even as monotheism crystallized, echoes of the older pantheon remain embedded in the Bible. Psalm 82 depicts God standing in the assembly of gods, judging them for their failures. This scene recalls El's divine counsel, but is reinterpreted through Yahweh's supremacy. Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9, in some ancient manuscripts, describes El Elyon dividing the nations among the sons of God, with Yahweh receiving Israel as his portion. Later scribes often altered these texts to remove polytheistic implications. The recurring denunciations of Asherah poles, Baal worship, and other gods are evidence that these deities were not remote abstractions, but lived realities in Israel's religious landscape. The biblical authors sought to rewrite Israel's story, transforming it from one of divine plurality into one of divine unity. But they could not fully erase the past. Archaeology and hidden evidence. Modern archaeology has shed crucial light on Israel's original gods. Sites like Ugarit provide texts that illuminate Canaanite religion, offering a backdrop to Israel's early beliefs. Excavations in Israel itself reveal shrines, idols, and inscriptions that challenge the biblical narrative of pure Yahwism. Kuntalat Adrud inscriptions, blessings by Yahweh and his Asherah indicate that Yahweh was once paired with a goddess. Household figurines. Found in ordinary Israelite homes, these likely represented fertility deities, most commonly Asherah. High places and altars, scattered throughout the land. These suggest diverse and localized worship practices, not centralized Yahwism. Together, these findings reveal a society deeply entangled in polytheistic traditions, only gradually moving toward exclusive Yahweh worship. Political power and religious transformation. Religion in ancient Israel was never just about belief. It was also about politics and identity. The rise of Yahweh as the sole God cannot be separated from the rise of Israel as a nation. When Israel was small and fragmented, many gods coexisted. But as kings sought to unify the people, the need for a single, centralizing deity grew stronger. Yahweh became the rallying point, a divine symbol of unity and national identity. The Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE, further accelerated this shift. With the temple destroyed and the people scattered, Israelite thinkers reimagined Yahweh as not merely a national God, but the universal God of all creation. Out of trauma emerged a radical vision of monotheism that would reshape world history. The suppression of the others. In the process, Baal, and Asherah were gradually diminished or demonized. El's name was absorbed into Yahweh's identity. Titles like El Shaddai or El Elyon were reinterpreted as aspects of Yahweh. Baal became a symbol of idolatry and corruption, though his traits of storm and fertility were largely transferred to Yahweh. Asherah was nearly erased, her name condemned, her imagery suppressed, and her role replaced by metaphors like wisdom or symbolic portrayals of Israel as Yahweh's bride. What had once been a pantheon was transformed into a singular, exclusive deity, with all rivals cast into shadow. Why this history matters. Understanding the original gods of Israel is not simply an academic exercise. It opens a window into the fluid, contested, and human nature of religion itself. It reminds us that beliefs evolve, shaped by history, politics, and culture. It shows how myths and memories are reshaped to fit new identities. And it offers a richer appreciation of the Hebrew Bible, not as a frozen monolith, but as a living document that reflects centuries of struggle between competing visions of the divine. For those of faith, this history does not diminish the significance of Yahweh. Instead, it highlights the dramatic transformation by which one deity came to embody the hopes of a people and eventually the vision of billions worldwide. The hidden roots of monotheism. When we think of the God of Israel today, we imagine the eternal, unchanging, all-powerful Creator, one God ruling heaven and earth. Yet this was not always how Israel understood the divine. The ancient world of the Levant was filled with gods, goddesses, and competing cults. And Israel, in its earliest centuries, was no exception. The story of Israel's original gods, El, Baal, Yahweh, and Asherah, is not one of a clean break from polytheism, but of slow transformation. It is a story marked by conflict, suppression, reinterpretation, and synthesis. From a high god El, to the stormbringer Baal, to the nurturing mother Asherah, and finally to Yahweh, who absorbed their titles and roles, Israel's religion was shaped in ways that are both fascinating and complex. This essay traces that journey, how Israel moved from many gods to one, and what that reveals about the evolution of religion, culture, and identity. El, the ancient father. Long before Israel emerged as a distinct people, the land of Canaan was steeped in the worship of El, the great high god. El was revered as the father of the gods, the creator of heaven and earth, and the wise patriarch who presided over the divine council. In Ugaritic text from the city of Ras Shamra, dating to the 2nd millennium BCE. El is portrayed as a dignified, bearded elder seated on a throne. His children, often called the sons of El, filled the pantheon with roles ranging from storm gods to sea gods, war deities, and fertility figures. The very name Israel reflects this heritage. El rules, or he strives with El. Early Israelites, like their neighbors, likely saw El as their patron. Even within the Hebrew Bible, we find titles such as El Elyon, God Most High, and El Shaddai, God Almighty, suggesting that Israel's religion began in continuity with older Canaanite traditions. Over time, however, El's identity was fused with that of Yahweh. This merging allowed Israel to retain continuity with its past while redefining its future. Baal, the stormbringer and rival. If El was the fatherly figure of creation, Baal was the vigorous god of life and fertility. Known as the stormbringer, Baal controlled rain, lightning, and the seasonal cycles on which agrarian life depended. His worship was widespread in the Levant, supported by temples, priests, and elaborate rituals. The Baal cycle, discovered in Ugaritic texts, describes his battles with cosmic forces, defeating Yam, the sea god, and struggling against Mot, the god of death and drought. These myths dramatize the rhythms of nature, fertility, harvest, death, and rebirth. In Israel, Baal's cult became a powerful rival to Yahweh. Archaeological evidence shows shrines and altars dedicated to Baal throughout the land. The Hebrew Bible itself frequently condemns the people for going after the Baals. Stories like Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18, dramatize the tension between Yahweh and Baal. Ironically, Yahweh himself inherited many of Baal's traits. Yahweh, too, became the storm god who rides on the clouds, who thunders, and who brings rain. In Psalm 29, originally a hymn to Baal, the imagery was reattributed to Yahweh. In absorbing Baal's power, Yahweh displaced him, turning a rival into a shadow of himself. Asherah, the forgotten mother. Among the most striking figures of Israel's early pantheon is Asherah, the mother goddess. In Canaanite religion, Asherah was the consort of El and the mother of the gods, associated with fertility, nurture, and sacred trees. She embodied life itself, and her cult spread widely across the Levant. In Israel, Asherah's presence is undeniable. Archaeological finds, particularly inscriptions from Kuntalat Adrud and Khirbet Elkam, refer to Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting she was worshipped as Yahweh's consort. Countless clay figurines of a female figure with emphasized breasts, often interpreted as Asherah icons, have been found in Israelite households, pointing to her role in family and domestic religion. Yet the Hebrew Bible systematically seeks to erase her. The Deuteronomistic historians condemn the Asherah poles, sacred wooden symbols erected near altars. Kings who tolerated Asherah worship are judged harshly, while reformers like Josiah are praised for destroying her shrines. This suppression was not simply religious, it was ideological. As Israelite religion evolved toward monotheism and male-centered priestly power, Asherah, the feminine divine, was marginalized. Her memory survives only in fragments, as a ghostly presence behind the text. But her role reminds us that early Israelite religion was not exclusively patriarchal. It once honored a divine mother alongside the father, Yahweh, the regional god who became universal. The most complex figure in this story is Yahweh. Unlike El, Baal, or Asherah, Yahweh does not appear prominently in early Canaanite pantheons. His origins may lie in the southern deserts, among nomadic groups in regions like Midian, Edom, or Seir. Several biblical passages support this. Deuteronomy 33 verse 2 describes Yahweh as coming from Seir. Judges 5 verse 4 places his appearance in Edom. These hints suggest Yahweh began as a regional warrior deity, associated with storms, mountains, and battle. As Israel developed as a people, Yahweh became its patron deity. Initially, he may have been one god among many, perhaps even a son of El. But over time, Yahweh rose to prominence, taking on El's roles as creator and father, while also adopting Baal's storm imagery and even Asherah's nurturing qualities, though stripped of her independent identity. This process culminated in the fusion of Yahweh and El. By the monarchy period, Yahweh was increasingly identified as the Most High, the sole God worthy of worship. Prophets like Hosea and Isaiah called for exclusive loyalty to Yahweh, condemning the worship of Baal and Asherah. Yet this exclusivity was a long struggle. Only with the reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah in the 8th to 7th centuries BCE did official policy enforce worship of Yahweh alone, centralized in Jerusalem. And only during the Babylonian exile did Yahweh become redefined as not just Israel's God, but the universal creator, sovereign over all nations and the cosmos. Transition and tension. The divine council echoes. Even as Yahweh became supreme, the echoes of polytheism lingered. Psalm 82 depicts God presiding over the divine council, judging other gods. Here, older imagery of El as head of the council is reimagined as Yahweh's authority over lesser beings. Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9 in early manuscripts describes Elion dividing the nations among the sons of God, with Yahweh receiving Israel. Later editors revised this to reduce its polytheistic tone. The constant biblical polemic against Baal, Asherah, and other gods reflects not their absence, but their persistent popularity. In other words, the Bible itself bears witness to the struggle between many gods and one. Archaeology. The ground speaks. The textual record is only part of the story. Archaeology provides crucial evidence of Israel's transition. Inscriptions from Kuntalat Ejrud, Yahweh, and his Asherah reveal a time when Yahweh was not worshipped alone. Household figurines suggest Asherah's cult was deeply embedded in daily life. Local shrines and high places demonstrate that worship was diverse and decentralized, not limited to Jerusalem's temple. These findings show that Israel's religion was pluralistic at the grassroots level, even as elites pushed for exclusivity. The shift from many gods to one was not immediate, but gradual, contested, and uneven. Politics and power. Why monotheism triumphed. The rise of monotheism cannot be explained by theology alone. It was also a political project. When Israel and Judah sought to unify their populations, a single God served as a powerful symbol of identity. Yahweh became not just a deity, but the embodiment of national loyalty. Worshipping other gods was not simply religious infidelity. It was political treason. The Babylonian exile intensified this process. With the temple destroyed and the nation scattered, Israelite thinkers redefined Yahweh as the universal ruler of history, the one God who controlled even foreign empires. Out of disaster was born the radical idea of exclusive monotheism, a vision that would shape Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The suppression of the others. As Yahweh rose, the other gods were either absorbed or suppressed. El's titles were transferred to Yahweh, so that Yahweh became both Father and Creator. Baal's imagery of storms and fertility was rebranded under Yahweh's name. Asherah was erased from official memory, her nurturing qualities sublimated into metaphors like wisdom, or symbolically absorbed into Israel itself as Yahweh's bride. This was less a denial of the old gods than a reframing. They did not vanish. Their qualities lived on in Yahweh. What changed was the insistence that only one name, one deity, embodied them all. Meaning and legacy. The story of Israel's transition from many gods to one is not just about ancient history. It reveals how religions evolve, adapt, and redefine themselves. It reminds us that beliefs are not static. They are shaped by social, political, and cultural forces. It shows how memory can be rewritten, how gods once worshipped widely can be recast as rivals, demons, or forgotten figures. And it highlights the extraordinary transformation of Yahweh, from a southern warrior god to the universal creator whose worship today spans billions. From many to one. The journey from El, Baal, and Asherah to Yahweh alone is a story of transition, tension, and transformation. El, the ancient high god, gave Israel its very name. Baal, the stormbringer, sustained life but became Yahweh's rival. Asherah, the nurturing mother, was once beloved but later suppressed. Yahweh, the regional deity, rose to absorb them all and stand as the supreme God. This story is not about the simple triumph of truth over falsehood, but about how cultures remember, reshape, and reinvent the divine. Israel's journey from many to one remains one of the most profound transformations in human religious history, an evolution that continues to echo in the faiths of the modern world. The story of Israel's original gods, El, Baal, Yahweh, and Asherah, reveals a forgotten chapter of faith where divine power was shared, contested, and redefined. From sky storms to sacred trees, these deities once shaped the lives, hopes, and fears of ancient peoples. Over time, Yahweh absorbed their titles, their roles, and their reverence, transforming Israel's religion into something entirely new, the foundation of monotheism. Yet their echoes still whisper through scripture, archaeology, and myth. Thank you for joining this extended journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden histories and untold truths of the ancient world.